Hello and welcome to this webinar on the font lifecycle in print and publishing workflows. I'm Chris Stevens, and today I'm going to take you through a font lifecycle, showing how fonts flow through from project conception and onto production and possible future projects. Before we actually begin, I'd just like to mention a few things about the webinar itself. As we proceed, you will all be in a viewing and listening only mode, and as such your webcams and your microphones have been turned off, so there's no need for you to worry about making noises and so on. You can though adjust your audio settings in the lower left corner of your screen in the Zoom application. We've also disabled the chat for you to chat to me, even though we do intend to have a question and answer session at the end. The chat is where you can see instead some more information that we'll be sending to you. So feel free to click it and see. But further on from that, you should also be able to see a button for the Q&A tool. So this is where you can enter any questions or comments that you may have for me during today's session. Just type into the Q&A box and click send, and we'll go through as many of those as we can at the end. So please make sure you don't forget to add those questions as you think of them as we continue. You'll also see just to the right, there's also a raise hand tool. And so just to be sure, before I start in full flow, before I begin, it would be good if you can all just use that button just so we can quickly see that you can all hear me okay and that we're ready to go ahead. Okay, so yep, I can see people starting to raise hands within the tool, so I guess we're good to go. Just finally though, at the top of your screen, you should also see there's the view options, which of course you can adjust to your preference, whether you want to go full screen or resize your window to zoom in and so on. So let's start, and rather than just providing a presentation today, I wanted to actually do, although it can be dangerous, a live demonstration of various software tools to essentially take you through an example workflow. It's a workflow that takes elements from what I've seen when working as a technical account manager directly with our customers in print and publishing, and that covers essentially the 6 key stages of the workflow to help ensure that the workflow can run smoothly, and the full understanding of how fonts are working within your workflows can be understood. And so I'm going to begin by just switching to where my project begins and where I, for example, may already have a whole bunch of InDesign files with various ongoing projects that we're working on. And of course, I can go through those projects and start to pick out a particular one that I'm going to work on today. So this is more as an end user, where I'm working on the design and layout. And of course, I come across this particular document that I'm working on that I want to open into my design application. And because it's not finished yet. And this is where typically you would go and switch across to your font management application, whether you're a single user or part of a team, and start to go through browsing all the different fonts that are maybe available to you, or the particular ones for the particular project that you're working on, in order to browse those fonts, select those fonts, and make them available then back in your application. And of course, one of the elements that we have within all our font management software is really helpful tools to help you work with those fonts, so that you don't even necessarily have to go across to your font management software to access your font collection. We have, as you can see here, font panels available within your Adobe applications that enable me to just go in, highlight the particular text. As you can see, the header here is using Anime Ace, but that's not actually our corporate brand font. There's something not quite right. It needs to be corrected, and I can literally just click on the particular font that I want to apply instead, and then similarly find all the other text boxes, select them, and apply the regular weight of the font, and just keep clicking to apply to the different elements in order to update my design and layout to correct the font problem that was there initially. It's also, though, missing a picture, and therefore I can go and look for my particular logo. In this particular case, it's going to be in my folder alongside the flyer. So I can scroll, but of course I could have just searched for it. I can pick it up, go back to my layout, and place the picture into the layout. And this is the sort of typical workflow that we tend to see of designers opening jobs, working with the fonts, making font selections, working with images, linking them into the picture boxes and so on, maybe editing the text as well, until finally you get to the point where you're then finished and you want to save that job, either overwriting the original, updating it, saving it to somewhere else, or what I'm going to do right now is just save a copy of it. And this is where, in a typical sort of workflow in print and publishing, automation processes may then take over. So I actually have, sitting on my desktop here, an input folder. So this is where finished jobs can be essentially placed, and where an automation workflow can then be built to take over. Often it will be running something like Adobe InDesign Server, but of course there are other publishing tools available, but where essentially you take that finished job and you throw it to your production workflow. So this is where we're moving out of the end user designer and more into the production workflow. So I save that document into my input folder, and this is where, if I go and look on my desktop, we should be able to see here my input folder. Let's just close these other windows. Should have had that already there. And you can see there's the document that I just saved. Now, if I give it enough time, because obviously production systems are often set to run on a particular time basis. I believe mine is set to run on something like about 30 seconds. It's part of the reason why I'm waffling a little right now to just delay. But given enough time, as you can see, yep, that document has now just magically disappeared from that input folder, because that's where my production workflow has taken over to take that InDesign file and job and run it through the production process. And what that production process may be, it can be all manner of things, but initially what it's done for me is it's collecting that font into an output folder and collecting essentially the fonts that are needed for that document. This is being handled through an add-on that we have for our font management solutions, so that your production server can talk to our font management in order to collect out those fonts for your automated production workflow. It's an add-on called FontLink, and one of the things that FontLink can do, you see, is, and here's one I prepared earlier, it can send out an email whenever a job is processed where there is some problem with it. In the example shown here, for example, it could be that the file that was processed was a particular InDesign file. However, it was created using fonts that don't exist on your production workflow environment. Maybe the end user had just gone off on the internet, downloaded a font, started using it in the design, then thrown the job to the production workflow, but the production workflow does not have that font available. It shouldn't be being used in production, and therefore you can get this kind of notification to tell me that Patala Pro Semi-Bold, that font does not exist on our font server, and neither does the particular version of Times Roman that the user used in their document, or the Patala Pro Extra Bold. You can also, though, of course, go and have a successful job. And this is where I'm going to cheat a little bit in that I don't have an InDesign server running on my laptop here, but that's where potentially that output folder could then trigger another automation to, for example, create a PDF and export that out and move it to a particular location ready to go to the printer. I'm just going to do that, though, manually right now to just export out into the same location. So if I just go to that output folder and put it alongside it, I'm just going to create a PDF alongside. So just pretending essentially that that's where my production workflow server, for example InDesign server, is going along and creating for me from that InDesign file and fonts that we've collected through FontLink to create for me the PDF. And of course, therefore, all those successful jobs where the PDF was created successfully and so on, again, that can feed back so that I can, as an administrator, get a list of all the successful jobs that were processed once per day, get an email to notify me. So this is referring to the specific instance of my production server, my InDesign server, and where then I get the list of dates and times on the given day as to what jobs have been processed today through production. So I've got my document out, and there it is sitting in the folder. And of course, I can therefore open it and look at it and send it to the printer. Except here's where there's a big elephant in the room that you've probably noticed that I've been ignoring, but that's not how you spell enterprise. What am I going to do? Well, the problem is, you see, I can highlight the letter that needs replacing, but Apple Preview doesn't give me any tool with which to modify that and change that. And so this is where a lot of our customers actually will use a tool such as a product called ArtPro Plus from ESCO. It's a tool that specifically can enable you to make those last-minute pre-press changes to your jobs. So if I launch the application, go to the PDF here, and just open it into ArtPro Plus, then you can see how I get access to the PDF to do lots of last-minute changes, whether it's changing all sorts of things that ArtPro Plus supports around colors, but even highlighting individual lines of text, changing out graphics if need be, sorting out clipping paths and all that sort of stuff. But the particular area that we're focused on today is the fonts, and wherever I can highlight the text, see which font it's using, and even if the font is not embedded in the PDF, we'll be able to, through an integration between our font management and ArtPro Plus, we can actually activate and make available the fonts from your font server directly within this application, so that I can go in and make that last-minute textual change. I can go in, replace the Z with an S. Obviously, you'll notice that's then causing a reflow issue. I can now go in, stretch the textual box, remove that issue, in order to make that production change just right at the last moment, without having to go back to the InDesign file, making the correction there, sending it back into my input folder to create that output file with the fonts that then is going to be reprocessed again through the production workflow to create the PDF. Instead, we can make these last-minute pre-press changes, saving a lot of time, a lot of money on regenerating stuff, and God forbid, if the job had gone through with the misspelling, that would have cost a whole lot more money than if we can make these kinds of last-minute edits. Of course, I can then take that and just resave it. And that then means that if I then come back and just look at the file back in Apple Preview, you can see it has been corrected directly in the PDF file. I can then take that finished PDF, and that's where then I can throw it maybe back into my archive of PDFs for all finished jobs, and put it, say, grouped together with all the other final outputs, so it can sit alongside all my other jobs that we previously processed. So that's the sort of end-to-end from design going through to production and then to output kind of sort of workflow that we've seen in customer environments in active use, but where they're not all necessarily using all those elements. But as you can see, our software and our tools and add-ons give you that end-to-end flow through. But that's not really so much a life cycle, because it's got a beginning and an end, because the cycle element talks more about things going full circle. And that's where what we can provide is, through the font management software, tools to help you get much more information about what's going on in your workflow. Now, of course, it starts with sorting out just what fonts do you have, who has access to them. So as you can see, you've got all your fonts, all your users, and how you're organizing things in terms of your different work groups, whether it's open source fonts, company fonts, particular projects, whether it's an annual report and so on, or just archived legacy jobs where you're keeping all the fonts for those past projects together. And of course, you've got all the user permissions and so on to control who can do what in order to maintain that control over what's going on. But what fundamentally, as part of the font lifecycle is concerned, that people are looking to get more information about, is information about the usage of fonts. And that all tends to come down to two kind of areas. One is just what is actually being used, and the other is, and should it be being used, which is where font licensing comes into play around, is the font licensed or not, is it legal, who should be able to use it, and so on. And so with our font management server, we do offer a reporting option that just lets you get more information about what's going on in your font real estate. It can just be a general overview around how many fonts of different types do you have, how many fonts in total do you have, in order to understand, are you still using a lot of older legacy PostScript type fonts, or have you managed to, as I have here, reduce that down to just a few older legacy fonts, but where we've upgraded most of our PostScript fonts to open type PostScript fonts, but still we have a mix of PostScript and true type. I can also, though, look at licensing, which fonts are covered by each individual license that we've purchased, and so I can get an understanding of whether a font's covered by how many licenses, and see how we've got them distributed across the different work groups. Fundamentally, though, I need to know about duplicate fonts. Now, duplicate fonts can take different forms. This, of course, includes, if I just show the example with my Arial black here, it could be that the fonts are different types of fonts, but they just happen to share the same menu name. So a duplicate font essentially is where you have more than one font that share the same menu name. Now, the reason it's important is just because operating systems will typically only allow you to have active one font with a specific menu name. If you try to make available a second one, it would overwrite the first one if you're doing things manually, or if you're using font management software, when you activate the second font, it would turn off the first font. But you may still have a need to manage multiple different versions of the same font for different reasons. It could be, as you can see here, I've got two open type PostScript pairs and two open type true types. So if I need both the PostScript version and the true type version, then I need to be able to handle duplicates. You'll notice, though, even within that, you can have two fonts that share exactly the same version number, even when they're the same type of font. So whilst you could have fonts where this is an old version, this is a newer version, there's still that element of the font foundry may not necessarily update the version number within the font when releasing a new cut, a new weight of a font. And if you've downloaded these different versions over time and thrown them into your font collection, you can end up with scenarios like this, where you have two fonts with the same name, the same type, the same version, the same foundry, but there's something different about these fonts. And this is where, and we'll look at this in a bit more detail in a bit, we have our unique font sense identification number. This is actually generated from the metrics of the font, as you'll see, but can be used to help you manage where you have these what we call unique duplicates of fonts. So typically, we don't allow you to add what we call true duplicates. So that's where if you try to add this font multiple times, it won't add it multiple times. There'll just be one copy of one font available, and it knows, because of these unique ID numbers, whether or not that font is already in your system or not. But handling those Font duplicates, powered by FontSense, really can help you get an understanding. A lot of our customers will look to clean this up, get rid of those duplicates, standardize so that there's just one cut of each Arial black so that there is no confusion for the workflow. Other customers, though, need to keep or access to older fonts for older jobs because of the need to every now and again maybe go and reference that old project, go and use the particular weight that that old project used, because of course the risk is if you get rid of those older versions of the fonts, when you open the old project, it would use the newer version of the font and you might start getting reflow issues again if something has changed in the font metrics. With that in mind, though, those duplicate fonts, you can also, though, have a look to be nosy about what is an individual user using. So you can see a list of all your users available, all your work groups, and which users are in each work group. But you can also go and have a look to see whether any of your fonts are out of compliance based on the font usage of those users and the licensing that you set up. Obviously for me right now, because I'm on a laptop with only one user connected to the font server and all my fonts that are licensed for at least one, because you can't add a license for 0, because that's essentially an unlicensed font. Therefore, everything's showing us no fonts out of compliance. But this can help you see where over the last 90 days you may have had a breach in your font licensing. You can also be nosy on an individual user, go and have a look at which fonts is this user got active on their machine right now. Maybe you just want to have a look and see, why are they still using that Anime Ace? Maybe we need to remove their access to that font because it's still there and active on their computer through the font management software. You can also, though, utilize that reporting, looking at usage by user, and we're going to be launching soon something to get you a kind of bigger picture for your entire environment, all the computers within your domain. And to give you a little taste of that, I'm going to just load up a screenshot of the interface for this new product we have that's coming called Font Discovery. Essentially, it lets you install a client application onto your workstations that will therefore report back to Font Discovery on the situation on those machines, but let you therefore understand the risks to your organization on a sort of more global, and I don't mean global as in across the world, although it could be used across the world, I just mean across your whole estate of PCs, Macs, and so on. That whole sort of big picture, full picture, as well as looking individually at an individual user's machine. Again, because I'm just running this one laptop, I've just got the one client listed there, but of course you could have all your machines listed in your environment with all the different risks where some machines may be more at risk with more duplicate fonts than others. But this is going to be looking not just at the font management element, it will be looking at system font folders, fonts that are stored in archive folders and so on the hard drive to get that full understanding of how many total fonts are there on that person's machine, how many of them are unique from others. So as you can see, I've got on my machine over 2,000 duplicate fonts, I've got 698 legacy fonts, I've got 478 archive fonts, and 59 corrupt fonts that I really should do something about because, God forbid, if we start using corrupt fonts in the workflow, the knock-on effect that could have. This tool has buttons, as you can see, across the top, including a sort of download button for the client, but it's also got, with the little page icon with the X in it, a button that lets you export out basically an inventory. And again, here's an example export in Excel. Obviously, you can sort by columns. It's just a text file that it exports. You can filter accordingly using the features of Excel, maybe even integrate it with some other sort of system for doing by bar charts and that sort of stuff, pie graphs, whatever you want to do. But yeah, export all data to get an understanding of all the font names, all the machines, and what inventory you have across your organization. You can also, though, export a list that is essentially your risks. And I thought I had that there. It's a shortcut, but it's not for opening, but I'll do it manually. And so again, this is where I can see those different risk categories about the archive fonts, the legacy fonts, or initially the duplicate fonts, where again, you can see that I've got these multiple different versions and duplicate fonts. In this particular case, they are the same font ID in terms of font sense ID, and so these are true duplicates. It's just that they're stored in completely different locations in terms of where on my hard drive those particular fonts are. And of course, it may be fine in certain cases. They may be coming for an application like Adobe Creative Cloud, but in other times it could just literally be, I have these fonts sat in a folder on my hard drive in the Extensis fonts. Okay, so that helps to give you an overview of what's going on within your environment, what fonts are where, what fonts are being used by particular users, are we in compliance or not, and understanding things from the font perspective. But of course, there is another way to look at things, and it's not from the font perspective, it's from the document perspective. So if I just come back now to my file management software here, Portfolio is what I'm using, you can see we've actually built into our Extensis portfolio support for font metadata directly within. Now, of course, most digital asset management solutions will support all the other sorts of metadata that you expect for managing movie files, office files, IPTC copyright information, and so on. We still also support all of those things. We also have specialist support for geo stuff, but in particular, we have specialist support for our own font-related metadata. So I can actually go through all my old projects, whether it's an InDesign file, whether it's an Illustrator file, or an output PDF file, as in this case, and go and see all the font families that have been used, the individual PostScript names of the fonts that are used in the document, the different font formats. So again, if I want to just search across all my documents, find all the documents that are still using PostScript fonts, so that we can go and substitute them for OpenType PostScript fonts, I can quickly and easily run that report across the entire set of documents that we've done, past projects, current projects, maybe even helping therefore with future projects. And you'll note it even includes the specific font sense IDs. So if I know, coming back again to my Universal Type client, if I know the specific font sense ID of our corporate font listed here, I can come and look back over here, search on the specific ID number in order and just click on it to search for all the other documents that are using that font. Maybe I actually want to find all the documents that are not using that font because they need updating because we have a new corporate font because Extensis has just gone through a rebrand. So I can find all these older jobs that are still using the old corporate font and need updating to use the new one. So building in that font-related search allows me to look at things from the sort of more document level perspective rather than from the font level perspective. And of course, I can take all that, see all the information, and maybe I need to share that with a colleague. Well, I can easily just export that out to, say, a PDF contact sheet. Wait for that to be created. It's going to download it to my downloads folder, or I'm just going to save it on my desktop for now, replace the one that I made earlier. And then open it up, and you can see it's exported font information alongside the thumbnail. Of course, it did only do it for one file because I made a slight mistake there. If I forgot to select all the items. So let's do that again because it's pretty quick to do. And again, let's overwrite that existing one and then reopen it again. And this time, yeah, you can see multiple pages showing a list of the font families that have been used, the file name, and obviously I can send that through in order that everybody knows this is the variety that we're using on these particular jobs here and there, and get that information out, shared with others who may not necessarily have access to our internal file management system. Maybe it's for a particular client. I want to share to the client all the projects that we've done for them and the fonts that it used. Okay, so That's it in terms of the actual demonstration. I'm going to recap though on everything, go into a little bit more detail on some of the technologies, the software tools that I've been demonstrating with. But just before I do that, another quick reminder again, if you do have any questions, because we are going to have a question and answer session at the end, just do look for the Q&A button in the Zoom, and you should be able to submit your questions there, and we'll get to them at the end. But let's come back to my presentation. So we have the font lifecycle in print publishing and workflows, and in our eyes, it's sort of based on, as I say, experience of working with customers at different stages of the workflow with our solutions. It looks something like this. Now, I don't expect you to know what each of these icons means, so that's why we're going to essentially go through them one by one. And it all essentially begins with a centralized font management. Whilst we do offer a single user product for individuals to manage fonts, particularly if you're a freelancer and so on, that's fine. But we do start with offering team-based font management, so that rather than me having to guess whether you've got the same font as me, I can share the same set of fonts between a team of users with our Suitcase Team Sync. Or if it's more broader basis, we have our universal type server. The main fundamental difference between those two is just that universal type server is on-premise, whereas Suitcase Team Sync synchronizes via the cloud. So we offer those flexible deployment options depending on the specific IT requirements of your environment. Obviously, for some customers, cloud seems to fit better, particularly when you're talking like multiple office sites across the world. Other customers, though, on-premise fits best because there's no risk of downtime and so on if the Amazon cloud were to have downtime, though. So far, it's only, I believe, had since we launched it, at most about 5 hours downtime in the entire 3 or so years that we've been using it. But of course, we offer different user-specific tools, permissions, and controls, and the type server product does offer more granular, much more flexibility around those permissions and controls than the team-based product. So it scales up from teams to enterprise level, but all starts with you getting a handle on your fonts by centralizing them into one place from where you can then manage them. That then enables your end users, your designers, to start using those fonts with professional font management with the kinds of things that you expect, which is integration, as you've seen, with your applications. And for that, we're referring to not just the automatic activation, but also those font panels that you saw me using to apply fonts without having to switch out of my design environment. I can just go straight into the InDesign file, highlight the text boxes, use the panel to access the fonts from the font server and make them available and applied onto the text layers without even having to touch the character palette and the font menu within the application. The automatic activation, though, is what enables you to just literally open the document and not have to think about which fonts the document needs before you open the document, getting rid of those sort of missing font warnings that you may often get in your applications. With the caveat, of course, of if the font, though, that it does need is missing, again, our font management will help with that, kicking in to prompt the user, letting them know if there are alternatives of the same named font to choose from, but at least putting it in the hands of the user to decide to substitute or not if you need to go looking to find the exact font that the document should have because for some reason it's not available to you. And you can organize how those fonts are configured into different work groups, into different libraries, into subsets from within those larger collections, and even create application sets so that when you launch a specific application, it's going to open those fonts in that application set automatically. So you can even ensure that your corporate font is just always available whenever anyone launches, say, PowerPoint. As you've seen, though, you can view the fonts within the font management software. We offer lots of different tools for how you view fonts, including looking into each individual glyph, even matching fonts for similar shape and size and so on. But where we also enable you to handle that situation of having duplicate fonts within there. And that's all powered by our unique and patented FontSense technology. It provides essentially what we refer to as a unique fingerprint for all your fonts. You've seen how earlier it supports having fonts with the same name, but where they'll end up with different FontSense IDs because perhaps they've, as per the example here, come from different foundries, maybe they are different version numbers, but as you saw earlier, maybe they're from the same foundry with the same version number, but there's just something subtly different. Because whilst we can reference type by classification, the foundry, the family, the PostScript name, FontSense goes that one step further, looking at the actual font metrics to go in and look at the font outline, the width tables, the kerning tables, looking essentially at what is in the font itself, and from that, generating these unique ID numbers. And it's consistent if I add exactly the same font into our single user suitcase, into our TeamSync, into our universal type server, wherever I add it into Extensis software, it will always get the same FontSense ID number so long as the font is not modified in some way. If somebody did, though, open it in some font editing tool, maybe tweak one glyph, maybe add a euro symbol, remove a euro symbol, it will get a new unique FontSense ID. And those IDs are visible across our software. So if I want to make sure you're using exactly the same font as me, I can tell you not the name of the font, I can even tell you the FontSense ID, you can search on it, you can activate it, and then we know. But we leverage those IDs in all your documents as well, as you've seen. We put that information into your files so that you can be sure exactly which one of your many duplicates was the one used on that particular project. Once you've created and designed, you finished the project, as you saw, you then have the need to collect the fonts for output. Now, yes, you could go manually and go file package in InDesign and other tools. You could also go to your font server and collect for output, because again, our font client software enables that option to collect for output. But if you want to integrate with a full production server, generally speaking, you would want to automate this kind of font collection. So as you saw, where you have that high volume work, it can save you time. The end users are just saving those files into that input folder, which again is defined by the workflow management. When you build those workflows, you control what locations it's all powered through, and it enables you to do that essentially font pre-flighting process, because any document that's placed in the right place will get the fonts collected for that document and the specific FontSense-based fonts that it needs. So even when you have duplicates, you can be sure it's going to be the right font at the right time, every time, based on that FontSense technology. With summaries, error reporting, as you saw with the 2 sample emails I shared. If, though, a job does go through, but there's still design changes that need making to it at the last minute, as you saw, there are tools like ESCO Art Pro Plus that can facilitate that. But where historically it would have a problem if the machine that you're doing that last minute prepress change on does not have the fonts. Because of course, to be able to make those edits, you need access to the font. Now, of course, one way around that would be to embed the fonts into the PDF that you're sending to Prepress. But even then, sometimes, depending on the font license, it might not be allowed for the printer to make any modifications and use that font software, even though it's embedded, without first purchasing a license for the font. That's something you need to double check and make sure of with your font licensing with the foundry from whom you acquired the font, to understand whether or not those changes can be made. But ultimately, one of the advantages with our connector for Universal Type Server is that it enables ESCO Art Pro Plus to actually also access fonts directly from the font server. So again, so long as you're making sure that the users are covered under your licensing that you build into your font server, you will have that immediate access to those fonts to do that automatic activation, again powered by FontSense, to enable those last minute changes, the text editing on the fly, just get rid of that Z, replace it with an S, recorrect the spelling mistake. We particularly see this as useful in print packaging workflows where, God forbid, if any packaging is produced with incorrect information on the label, as you can imagine, that could be a particular legal minefield if things go out, a product on the shelf with incorrect information. So being able to reduce those inconsistencies, those font errors, saving time and money, it also helps, therefore, uphold your brand integrity. Also, though, we offer that reporting, as you saw, 2N8 and font licensing features with Universal Type Server Enterprise. So we offer a professional level, but if you need to go that one step further to help avoid font copyright lawsuits, to get that font usage reporting, to understand what fonts are in use within your font server and by the end users, then you can even prevent that illegal overuse. Once you tag a font with a license, you can make the license a strict license, so that if a font is covered by a 5-user license, it will only allow 5 machines to activate that font at any given time. You can build, therefore, all these rules and your font licensing into your whole licensing strategy, adding in documentation that is visible to the end users. So if they need to check the terms and conditions before they select a font to use in design, then you can let them see that end user license agreement that came with the fonts when they were licensed. We also, though, let you understand the whole landscape of your organization. As you saw with font discovery, looking at things from the font perspective and the machine perspective, but also looking from the document perspective and jobs and project perspective. So going through, tracking those documents, understanding which fonts have been used in which documents and when and how often. You can use it even to check for all the documents that say are using more than 5 fonts, because maybe you like a cleaner, fewer fonts being used on your designs, and you don't want people activating 100 fonts and using 20 of them in a design. You want them only using maybe 5 or 6, or vice versa. You want more variety. Everyone's always using exactly the same fonts, and you can see that because when you run a report on show me all the documents that are using this given font, it comes back with every document that you've ever produced. So understanding that font usage within your environment can really help you, because it helps from an audit perspective. Understanding that inventory of fonts that have been used, that are being used, it helps you understand those risks with the font discovery about where do people have corrupt fonts and unlicensed fonts and so on. But it also feeds back into your font management organization, which is what ultimately completes the font lifecycle. What I mean by that is simply that if you understand how your font usage is happening, how people are selecting and which fonts are being used, and you can see things like overuse of a specific font, underuse of other fonts, it can help re-inform you into how you manage your font collection. Why license fonts that nobody's ever using? Why do we keep hitting problems with overuse of fonts? Answer, it's because, and we keep hitting our font licensing limit, it's because everybody's using that same font and go to it all the time. But why are they doing that when we have all these thousands of other fonts available for them to select from, and maybe they just don't know how to find them, how to compare fonts and make more creative selections in the workflow? So by feeding back all this information about usage and about what's installed where, what people are doing, it can really help to inform how you then manage that centralized font management in order to, over time, continuously update and essentially have influx that font real estate, but where it's optimized so that you're not wasting money licensing fonts that you don't need, you're not losing money with mistakes and job corrections that are needing to happen, but where you have to go back upstream. It can all be automated, it can all feed back. And that's essentially, therefore, what these icons were referring to. At the top, centralized font management, moving on to the accurate font usage, powered by FontSense, enabling that automated font collect for output with last-minute prepress changes, moving on to the font compliance risks, and finally, getting that font recognition and landscape and full understanding of your font lifecycle. So, thank you for attending. That's our presentation for today, but we do now have time to go through our Q&A. So just bear with me a second as I have a separate window to the side of me here to have a look at the Q&A section in order to have a look at the questions that we have. Okay, so the first question that's come in has come in from Pippa, and I'm going to tap to answer this question live. If you do have the Q&A window open, it's not too late still to submit questions. You should though see the questions that I'm clicking to answer live appearing as I do them. So as you can see, this first question from Pippa is, do you have to enter the licensing info manually for your purchased fonts, and how do users know what license conditions apply to each font? The answer to the first one of those is essentially yes, but we do have tools for obviously quickly applying fonts, so you can bulk apply the license to all the fonts, but it does begin with essentially back over in our type server administration over here, under font licenses here, you click to create the license, and you can even go in and edit existing licenses, and that's where you can then fill in the information about the name of the license, are you restricting it, what are the license terms, and you can create your own terms for what usage is allowed. This just gives a quick view without having to read the full documentation, but again, you can link to the full documentation if you need to. And that full documentation essentially will be presented to the user. Where is it presented to the user? Well, that's back in their client over here when they select a font. And this is where I need to go to find the right font that I like to use to demonstrate it. You can see how I can view font license information here. So that information is visible back through to the client user. So I can see, oh, if I want to use Adobe Caslon Pro, I can embed that in PDF, but I should only use it when I'm working on this particular magazine. But if I need to download or link to the font licensing full details, then I have that available there to just click on as a hyperlink to either download the PDF of the license or load the website where Adobe has all their font licensing information. Okay, the next question we have is from Chris Lombardi, and again, I'm going to answer this live rather than typing a text reply. So it's, I have a font that is licensed for 5 users and is under strict enforcement, and I have a 6th user that has a need for the same font. Is there a way to have users communicate with other users inside the UTC that has the font activated to request a deactivation in order to free up the license? I guess the short answer is no, we haven't implemented any chat application into the type client, but there is a way essentially for administrators to get an understanding of which fonts are at full usage. So that is one of the areas that they can see in the compliance report. There is also just the element of, as I say, you can look at which fonts are back over here under reports. So that was just, yeah, font usage by user. You can also look at to see all the list of all the users on the server to try and see who's using it. You can even look at font usage by work group in order to understand, yeah, which fonts are running at maximum usage. So this one's covered under a 30-user license. Currently, nobody's using it, but if I did have someone who's using it, you can see how I can sort on the particular column to see that, yeah, I am using a body bold italic right now, and therefore I'm using one of the 20 licenses. It won't tell me who's using it, but it would have to be somebody within the particular work group if I do filter by work group, and obviously you can see who are all the users in a given work group. But there is that element of enabling strict licensing is not always the best option, although it is available. Yes, it does ensure compliance at all times with font licenses, but it can potentially interrupt the workflow where I, as an end user, go to activate a font and basically get told I can't because it's already at maximum usage. You need to be a little careful of this, of course, just because not all font licenses that are available from Foundries support what's called concurrent licensing. And what we mean by that is where not all font licenses are essentially licensed on a user basis. Most are licensed on a per machine basis rather than a per user basis. And that per machine basis license often does refer to if you are sharing the fonts from a central server, whether that's just a file server or a font server, like with our software, they usually would say something along the lines of, if your work group, say company fonts here, has this many users in the work group, and you add the font to that work group, then you need to license for all of these users, regardless of whether at any moment in time, only 2 of them have turned the font on. If you're allowing that network connectivity to allow all 10 of them, I haven't actually counted, 11 users actually, to use the font at the same time, they would often say in the license, you need to license for 11 users, because even though you have that element to say, but I'm being strict and only 5 can access it at once, they often don't allow you to essentially move the font around to say it's on this machine right now, and in an hour's time it will be on that machine, but we've removed it from the first machine. They often don't support that kind of moving fonts around and concurrent-based activation. They often require you to license for any machine that can access that font, has to be able to be covered by a license. So just be careful of that in terms of your actual font licensing. Obviously, that will all be in the terms and conditions. I'm not saying there aren't concurrent font licenses available out there. There are, but they just tend to be the minority type of license. Most font licenses tend to be on a per machine basis. Obviously, there's elements of the concurrency, though, in, for example, things like Adobe fonts that comes with your Adobe Creative Cloud subscription. Those fonts are covered under your Creative Cloud subscription license. So any machine that I, as a user, logged into my Adobe Creative Cloud, have access to under my Adobe fonts here, I can use them on more than one computer because my Creative Cloud is allowed to install on more than one computer under just the one subscription for me. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. It would appear, though, at the moment that we do only have the 2 questions so far. It's not too late, though, if anyone else wants to ask anything. But otherwise, oh yeah, we have another question. This one's anonymous, but that's fine. And the question is, the question is, I'll just tap to answer live so everyone can see the question. It's a question of, can fonts travel with a job? So if an artist creates, can that artist pass the font along to a print vendor to produce? I'm guessing this is, again, thinking from a licensing perspective, because obviously, yes, any application can collect for output to collect the fonts. It's whether legally you're allowed to send that font with the job to wherever you're sending it to the print vendor to produce. Usually, most font licenses will say, yes, you're perfectly allowed to collect the font, send it to the printer so that they can open the job and print it. However, they usually have in there an element of, but if the printer is going to do any edits, then the printer has to own a license for the font. And typically they would say, I'm not buying a license for the font just to print the job, because I get jobs from all manner of people all over the place, hundreds and thousands of fonts. A printer can't afford to be buying every font that every job is supplied with. So they'd usually look to the supplier to license for the printer if the printer is going to make changes, or in most cases, the print vendor would basically say, we print as supplied. So whatever you supply us, we open it, we print it. If it's wrong, then that's on you for not supplying the correct font with the job. Obviously, you may have missed the bits of the presentation about automation. That's where we do have within our Universal Type Server the add-on font link to collect the fonts for your jobs automatically, so that it's not down to the user to collect the fonts. They will just automatically, when you put that document into the input folder, they'll get moved to the output folder with the fonts collected, ready to just send to your print vendor, ready for the production process, just right there, all good to go. So there shouldn't really be any font errors in that case if you're running our font management software and automating that collection of the fonts. But ultimately, again, though, as you saw with the Art Pro connector, if you are, though, exporting out to a PDF and you're sending that to the printer rather than the actual source files of an InDesign file with fonts, you're just sending them a PDF. Again, they typically would not be allowed to edit that unless they have a license for the font to use the font software, because any actual sort of edits, you are utilizing the font software, and fonts are licensed as software. And essentially, like any application that you install on your computer, you need a license to install and use that software. And so that applies through to fonts as well. So hopefully that answers that question sufficiently. Okay, so as I say, it's not too late still. If anybody else does have a question, we do still have 3 to 4 minutes of our 1 hour slot that we planned for, but it's looking like that's it for today. Yep. Okay, so just thank you again for attending. Hopefully this proved useful to show you how getting that full understanding, not just from the design side, not just from the organizational side, but even from the document side, and understanding how those fonts are in use, how often things are being used, can help to, again, feed back into how you organize your fonts, how you, again, flow through to then production and so on. And so it's something that's really always in flux, constantly evolving. As information comes to light, you can feed that information back through to make smarter decisions around your workflow, keeping the font life cycle running and your workflows running smoothly.